business leadership. According to his official biography on the Commerce Department website, he has restructured over $400 billion of assets in virtually every industry in the American economy, from insurance to oil and gas to steel, trucking, banking, restaurants, real estate, and pretty much everything in between. He has been the chairman or lead director of more than 100 companies operating in more than 20 different countries around the world. With bipartisan support, on February 27th of this year, Wilbur Ross became the 39th United States Secretary of Commerce. Secretary Ross, welcome here to Denton's. Well, NAFTA 2.0 is the name of our event here today.
Sure.
Is the topic about which, of course, all three countries are incredibly engaged in. Really want to hear your comments about today, round 4, and what's going on. So why don't I just leave that open-ended question to you. Round 4 started today, highly anticipated. How are the renegotiations going in your view?
Okay, well, I've asked my associate.
The microphone just to the side there.
I've asked my associate to hand out to you a little one sheet of paper. This shows the topics that are going to be covered in this round. The round that began today, originally scheduled to end on Saturday. Now I believe they're going to extend it through Tuesday. So that's, there are 28 items on it. Some of them had also been discussed in part at prior sessions. Some of them undoubtedly will be discussed also in subsequent sessions. But I thought you'd find it interesting to see the range of things that will be discussed this go-round. So far, the talks have mainly done basic background things, kind of what I would call boilerplate things, or relatively easy issues. On the list I've given you there, some more contentious issues will be coming up very shortly. Those would include things like rules of origin, sanitary and phytosanitary, probably medical and pharmaceutical, technical barriers to trade, so and textiles, as well as trade remedies and dispute settlement. My guess is that that list are going to be the key hard issues in these sessions, and they've not really been addressed so far. They've been tabled so people know that they are issues, but there really hasn't been much of substance done with them to date. In terms of timetable going forward, there's no precise deadline, and those of you who are familiar with trade negotiations know these are progressing at lightning speed compared with the normal ones. It's not usual to have so many days of consecutive negotiation, not usual to have such small intervals between negotiating sessions. There's a reason for that, and the reason for it is the political calendar. The fast track authority, the so-called TPA that we have in the US expires in July of 2018. Given the nature of Congress nowadays, who knows whether we'll get that extended or we won't. So that could be one deadline. If we lose TPA, I don't think you'll ever see a deal done here, because what TPA does do is not so much that it's fast. We've actually found it painfully slow because of all the consultation. But what it does do is the final deal gets put to a vote in the Congress up or down. No amendments possible. And amendments are what would eat up all the time and make things confusing. So that's one reason we have a time limit. Second, the Canadian provincial elections are around mid-year. The Mexican presidential elections are also a little bit after mid-year. And then, of course, in November, we have our own midterm elections here. So in general terms, once you get much into next year, nobody's going to be able to get as big and complicated a deal as this done. So more or less the end of this year is what we believe is the realistic deadline if something's going to emanate from it. It'll be longer than the original deal. Original one had 22 chapters. This will probably have 28. And you've seen a list of 28 there. That's not all-encompassing, and not each of those will be a full chapter. But we think there probably will be 28 chapters to the eventual thing. The tone so far has been pretty constructive, but as I say, we have not gotten to the hard part. Both Mexico and Canada, particularly Canada, have been lobbying very aggressively. Canada visited with me and the president today. They lobbied in the Congress as well. And obviously all parties have been trying to stir up trade groups in the U.S. To have U.S. go easy in the negotiations. The president is determined he's determined that if we have a new NAFTA, it has to be one that suits our interests much better than the existing NAFTA. And as you've seen in the media, from time to time he's expressed a total willingness to depart from NAFTA should that become necessary. We don't hope it will, we don't desire that it will, we don't believe that it will, but it is at least a conceptual possibility as we go forward. There probably are more issues, more difficult issues with Mexico than with Canada, but mostly the same substance that does have relevance in each side. And then there are a few issues specific to individual countries, particularly to Canada. They undoubtedly will consider bringing up something about softwood lumber. They undoubtedly will consider bringing up something about Bombardier and Boeing, although they have yet to do so in the formal negotiating sessions. So that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of where we are at the moment.
You said something there a moment ago towards the end. You said that your expectation is that it will be successful.
Well, I hope it is, sure. We wouldn't be wasting all this time if we weren't hopeful.
I want to put a question to you that I think is on a lot of folks' minds, and that is the issue of trade deficits. Rhetorically, it's been gone to over and over again by the president as a preeminent frustration with NAFTA. Given that Canada, I'm Canadian, Canada, we have a trade surplus, the United States has a trade surplus with Canada.
That's not correct if you can include crude oil and everything else. And we're talking goods. We have a goods deficit if you include crude oil.
How do you plan to remedy trade deficits? How is that achievable in a trade agreement?
Well, it's several things. The first thing is through enforcement. Our feeling is that prior administrations were not as aggressive as they should have been with trade enforcement. We have brought, since I came on the scene, 48% more cases so far this year than was true in the last year of the prior administration. So more cases and different cases. We are very interested in self-initiation as an activity. We're interested in it for a couple of different reasons. First reason is now if you're a smallish industry or a highly fragmented industry or one that has a lot of foreign participants, it can be hard to meet the requirements for the industry itself to initiate the case. We have the power to self-initiate, and if the facts justify, we can, we will, and we're going to do more. The second factor in that costs millions of dollars to bring one of these cases. And again, if it's a smaller or a more fractured industry, that's a little bit of a challenge for them. But third reason, and in the case of dealing with big countries like a China, the other important factor about self-initiation is this. If a company or a group of companies brings a complaint, say against China or Japan or any other big player, they become quite subject to retaliation. If Commerce Department initiates the case, there's not a lot they can do to retaliate against us. So we think it will enable more companies to come forward and be more candid with the information they give us, because they will have a degree of anonymity from the perpetrator.
Canada has said that Chapter 19 is a red line that can't be crossed. Mexico has signaled the same thing. They've added, I think, President Peña Nieto has signaled, I think, 5 or 6 items as party has signaled. What is a red line in the negotiations for the Americans?
Oh, I think it's premature to talk about red lines. You have to define what they really are, and we'll see what comes in the give and take, and we'll see whose red lines are really red lines.
As you know, no doubt that Tom Donahue of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been quite aggressive in the past few weeks. I'll just read the quote and I'll invite you to respond. He said, "Let me be forceful and direct. There are several poison pill proposals on the table from the administration that could doom the entire deal. All these proposals are unnecessary and unacceptable. They have been met with strong opposition from the business and agricultural communities, congressional leaders as well. We've reached a critical moment, and the Chamber has had no choice but to ring the alarm bells over these poison pills." As you draw your drink, I invite you to respond.
Well, Tom is a good friend of mine. We have a good working relationship, and he has me speak frequently at his events for the various countries and various multilateral entities. Tom is very much a free trader, and he's right. The agriculture community is worried. The multinational community is worried, because they're the ones who have things potentially at risk. Our effort will be, first of all, to do no harm and not have retrograde motion in any aspect of the NAFTA as it relates to the U.S. But second, to try to build upon the limited concessions that Canada and Mexico made in the TPP negotiations. And then third, to pursue what we think are important factors that have been hurting us in terms of the trade among the 3 countries. You might have seen the editorial I had put in the Washington Post a few weeks ago about value added in manufacturing, and kind of dispelling the myth that goods went back and forth so much that they really had huge amounts of American content, even though they ultimately came through either Canada or Mexico. So that is an important factor.
They identified 3 poison pills, and I'll ask you to speak to them. First is on rules of origin, 85% North American content, 50% American content. In effect, in the argument is, I think a lot of folks, certainly in the parts industry, the automotive parts industry, which I know you know very well, is $1 trillion global business. It was pointed out to me today by a colleague that the Ford Mustang is very much identified as an American car, but it's not assembled, it's assembled in North America with less than 50% American content, whereas you have the Honda hybrids, which are assembled in Japan with over 70% of North American content. So defining what constitutes American content with rules of origin is, it seems to be a bit of a moving target.
Oh, I don't think it's that hard at all. But people always use the outlier examples, and those are 2 that you cited. In reality, the cars coming in from Mexico and Canada have less than 20% U.S. content. Those same cars have far more than 25% content, not even from NAFTA, from outside NAFTA. So those are anomalies that were not intended. The non-NAFTA content in automobiles and in manufactured goods in general, the non-NAFTA content has been growing, and growing rapidly, and largely at the expense of the U.S. So that's the reason that we have rules of origin as a target.
But isn't that because many of those industries, backup cameras, sensors, safety equipment, are industries that frankly don't exist in the North American marketplace in order to